Yeah, it's obviously big news this week was Nottingham Forest having that 4-point deduction, which obviously Forest were not very happy with. But the latest suggestions coming from within the club is that they're highly unlikely to appeal that, because if they were to appeal it and the Premier League rejected that as well, they could be handed even more points of a deduction as well for a frivolous appeal and everything else. But yeah, I think Forest are going to have to take this one on the chin right now. Obviously, when you look at the figures, their 34.5 million loss was a lot higher than Everton's, which was 19.5 million. But obviously, there's mitigating factors in that as well. That obviously 2 of those years was when Forest were in the Championship, when we're looking at these financial results as well. So yeah, I feel for Forest and the fans. Obviously, they've needed to spend money to try and compete in the Premier League, and they'll say that was successful last year when they went out and spent all that money on a whole host of players, that their end goal was to secure survival, which they did. But now they've had this 4-point deduction. It throws them right into the relegation zone, 1 point behind Luton. And yeah, we're going to have an almighty scrap now to see who can stay up. And as football fans, we would prefer that everything was decided on the pitch, not off the pitch. And that's probably where it leaves a bad taste in the mouth for Forest fans and also for Everton fans as well.
Paul, what did you make of the fact that Everton, of course, well, they overspent Everton by £20 million. Everton spent less and got a higher points deduction. Do you think the Everton fans have a right to be disappointed? Or equally, have Forest really got away with one here?
Listen, it's a topic that I'm getting fed up of talking about, and I don't like it because it's so inconsistent. I mean, it's just the rules are in place, but are the rules they're not adhered to? But the punishment's not consistent either. I mean, Forest spent 77% more than Everton did. Their breach was 77% worse, yet they get lesser points because they admitted it. They came out before the deadline. They said, "Look, we've done it. We'll hold our hands up. This is it." And they played ball, if you like. It's like pleading guilty in a court case to get a lesser sentence, and that's exactly what they've done. But on the flip side of it, you think, how are these clubs supposed to compete? Manchester City, Liverpool, Manchester United, Chelsea, Tottenham, just as an example, no specific club, have been able to spend what they want for years and get to the level that they've got to. These clubs come into the Premier League. How are they going to close the gap? How are they going to be able to stay in the Premier League? You've got Newcastle, the richest club in the world, who are not allowed to spend money because of these legislations. Manchester City have done it for a long time, and look where they are because of the years of spending and the years of building that they've done. Now these rules have come in. You're stopping teams from doing it. I mean, Forest is an example. I mean, they grossly overspent. They oversubscribed with players. I mean, the first window was a British record, 22 players in the first window. Since Forest have come up, they've signed 42 players. I mean, that's incredible in 2 seasons. That turnover of players is incredible. And the PSR rules and the FFP rules were probably brought in for that exact reason. But there is a huge argument that why not let these teams spend? The gap is never going to close if teams can't spend to narrow the gap. As far as Everton go, I mean, they were the crash test dummy, if you like, weren't they? They were the first ones. They were thrown to the wolves first, and their points deduction was assessed by everybody. And you know, how do you work it out? What's the maths behind it? You know, Everton got 10, then reduced to 6. Forest have spent 77% more than Everton, and they've only got 4 because they were nice and admitted it. I mean, it's just that it really is. I mean, it's laughable that the Premier League are doing a really, really good job of proving that they do need this independent regulator, and quickly.
Pete, what do you think about Marinakis' stance in all of this? Do you think actually if they are to get relegated, hypothetically, if it does turn out that they can't make up that window in terms of that points deduction, would he be likely to put the club up for sale and quit? Could we see him walk away because of the fiasco that's going on off the field?
You never say never. Obviously, he's a very volatile owner, which we've seen that in the past. And obviously, tried to get on the pitch in that recent Forest-Liverpool game because he wasn't happy with the refereeing decision that he felt cost his side in that game as well. My understanding is that his focus is on Nottingham Forest. Obviously, he's owner of Olympiacos in Greece as well, but he wants to make sure Forest become an established side in the Premier League. He knows that's where the money is on offer in the Premier League rather than the Greek Super League. But yeah, he's a very wealthy man. Obviously, he won't have taken this news lying down, I don't think. He feels his club have had to spend that money to try and compete in the Premier League, like Paul has mentioned, with all those influx of signings. I don't think he'll walk away. I'm sure he probably feels there's enough in that squad and in the management team that they can overcome this points deduction and stay in the Premier League again, just like they did last year under Steve Cooper, when it looked like they were probably going to get relegated, but they rallied late on and got enough points to stay up. Marinakis has got big plans for Forest. He wants to be competing with the more established clubs in the Premier League. That's why he's put his hand in his pocket in the last few transfer windows and gone out and signed all these players, because he wants to try and close the gap. But it's not easy to do that, especially when you're trying to deal within these parameters of the FFP and PSR rules as well. So I don't think there's any sort of concern from Forest that Marinakis could walk away from the club. He's still fully committed and wants Forest to become a force in the Premier League in the future.
And that's the frustrating thing, isn't it? I mean, you've got an owner there who is willing to spend money, who's proved that he wants to spend money, but he can't. How is he going to grow his football club without being allowed to spend the money that he's got? I mean, Nottingham Forest were not in the Premier League for 23 years. You can't prepare for a return to the Premier League in 23 years because you don't know what's going to happen. You know, you can't predict in the Championship, oh, we're going to go up this season, or we're going to go up in 3 years. Let's prepare for the Premier League. You can't put those foundations in place or guarantee those foundations. Forest got into the Premier League after 23 years of being out of it. You've got to spend money to stay in it, to compete with the teams that are already in it that have been grossly overspending for however long. But they've been overspending because they've got the money to do so. And a team like Forest, who have got the money to do so, are now not allowed to do it, so they can't close the gap. That's where there's a real flaw in the rules for me.
Paul, is the bigger worry as well, to kind of add to that actually if they are to get relegated, they will lose some of their top talents because they're not going to want to play in the Championship. They're going to want to move on to potentially to play in the Premier League. Is that where you potentially see that going if they are to go down?
Well, that's what happens. I mean, the vultures circle when any Premier League team goes into the Championship, don't they? The best players generally do tend to get picked off, whether it's because of the players' talent or because of the wage bill that the club has to cut. You know, the club cuts its cloth accordingly. I mean, look at my old club, Leeds United, for example. They've got 5-6 players who were first-team regulars in the Premier League, high earners that are just out on loan. And that was a wage bill thing. And that's what happens when you go in the Championship. But the worrying thing for Forest and for Newcastle, I know we're talking about Forest, but you look at Newcastle, and we spoke about it before on the pod, all the Newcastle fans getting really excited about a transfer window. 2 weeks before the window is due to open, they find out that they might have to sell Bruno, they might have to sell Trippier, and they might have to sell Almiron, their 3 best players, rather than being the richest club in the world to go and balance the books. And we said it again before, the January transfer window, it was awful. It was the worst transfer window from a neutral spectator, journalist, media point of view that there's been in a long time. And this is going to scare clubs. It really is going to frighten clubs. You look at the transfer list of deals that were done, there was so many more outgoings than incomings. On average in the Premier League, I looked at it, I think it was between 6 and 7 players per team, outgoings, simply because of this FFP. And that's what's going to happen.
Do you think, Pete, as well, you know, you've mentioned effectively in there that Forest aren't going to appeal. They're going to take the 4 points on the chin and try and stay up, really. If they were to turn around and appeal, does that also jeopardise the integrity of the league even more? It's just another thing they have to deal with alongside this Everton case that's going on that we'll come to in just a minute. Would that be a concern for them?
Yeah, I think it would be a concern for the Premier League and all the other teams in it, because we could have relegation decided after the season's over if we go to these appeals and everything else, and that would be a disaster for the Premier League as a product. It would not be a good look for the Premier League around the world, which obviously they want to protect its image and the integrity of the league. So if we're having clubs stay up on points on the pitch when the season ends in May, and then a week later that they end up getting points deductions and results in them being relegated, it would just make a complete mockery of the league and the whole integrity of it. So yeah, if there is going to be appeals, they need to be heard before the end of the season, because it won't do anybody any good at all. And as I said, it's not a good look for the Premier League. But the whole thing, like Paul's mentioned, they seem to be making up the rules as they go along a lot of the time. We've had independent commissions, we've had the Premier League's rulings. Obviously, the Premier League initially wanted to give Forest an 8-point deduction, and then it was put down to 6 because of the breach, and then the size of the breach, 3 points for each of those charges. And then, as Paul said, because they complied and fully cooperated with the investigation, they had 2 points reduction off that 6-point penalty. So that's why they got to the 4. So they keep making up the rules as they go along. And as I said, it doesn't do anybody any favors. And yeah, as I said, it would make a complete mockery of the league if these appeals go beyond the end of the season, and then we see teams relegated once the final ball of the season's been kicked. So yeah, hopefully things can get resolved, but I'm not going to hold that much hope, because it's been a bit of a farce, the whole thing.